In continuing on with how Congress functions, we need to understand the leadership structure. Okay? So in the House of Representatives, the person that leads the House is known as the Speaker of the House. And the Speaker of the House is a person elected from the majority party within Congress itself. So what happens is the elections happen nationally, people report to Congress, and on January 3rd, they are sworn in to be congressional, representatives and senators, and they have to swear to protect, uphold, and defend the Constitution, I think is what they're sworn in by, okay? And so when they become representatives and senators on January 3rd, they then immediately go behind closed doors. And so they have what's called a caucus, which they group together and form, a committee, but it's not open to the public. And they close the doors and they all sit around and say, who's going to be what leader, who's going to be in what position, where do we do this and that. And there's a fair amount of screaming and yelling. There's also a lot of hurt feelings sometimes. There's some pretty shady dealings sometimes. There's some bargains made. There's some deals struck. And eventually, when they come out, you then know what these positions are. Okay? So the people of America do not vote on them. You vote for your representatives. The representatives and the senators then get together and decide who's going to be this or that. So whoever is the majority party at the time of this video, right before the election in 2020, currently the Democrats control the House, and so they will select the Speaker of the House from the Democratic Party ranks, okay? Because they are the majority party, and so they get to select the majority leader, who is the Speaker of the House. At this current time, that is Nancy Pelosi from San Francisco. I think she's a Democrat from California there, okay? So she is the Speaker of the House, and she was selected by the Democrats who had a majority in the House at the time of that last election, which was 2 years ago, because representatives are elected every 2 years. So they select these things every 2 years. The Speaker of the House has a lot of power because they sit on the Ways and Means Committee in the House, and by doing so, they get to decide which bills go where, and if they want to mess with people, they can, or if they want to be nice to people, they can. They get to set up the rules. If they say it's open to debate, well, then everyone talks and talks and talks, and pretty soon that law just goes away. If they set it up as a closed rule, that means they like it, because the only few people can talk, and then we're done, and let's vote on this thing. So it gets moved to the front of the line if they do that. So the Speaker of the House has a lot of power within Congress. They also have a lot of power because the Speaker of the House is third in line for the presidency. Okay? So if the president goes down, if the vice president goes down, the Speaker of the House is third in line, and they immediately get sworn in as president. So that's a lot of power. Okay? So currently that's occupied by Nancy Pelosi. We're going to see after this next election, she could still be in the House, but she may or may not be the Speaker, because remember, this is like a power struggle within each party. So if the Democrats retain control, she still has to remain control of her own party in there. So a lot of games that go on in there. All right? But so far, she is the Speaker of the House. There will, of course, be a minority group there, and usually they have a minority leader. So if the Democrats have the majority, the Republicans will be the minority party. And it is flip-flopped over time and throughout history, okay? So you move from majority to minority all the time, depending on what the American people vote on. So the majority or minority leader is usually a Republican in this case. It could be Democrat if it flips, but that person is usually the focal point of the minority group. And they're the ones that do a lot of the press releases in regards to things like that. So they're the ones that are going to step up and say, hey, we don't agree with what they're doing over there. You know, they're the majority and we're the minority, but we should be in control because they're wrong and we're right. So the minority leaders are usually very vocal. in going to the press. They really seek them out, and they sort of bring the message of the minority group forward. It's done different ways in different countries. In England, for instance, it's way more exciting. So the majority party sits on one side of Parliament, and they basically line up all the minority parties like opposite them. And the majority has to give their report, and the minority can respond, and they're looking each other in the eye, and they yell back and forth all the time, and it's very British, but it's also very exciting. In America, we tend to do our battles in the press. So a lot of these people don't actually talk directly to each other. They'll say something to the press, and someone else will say something to the press, and they don't actually like meet and have it out. Okay, so the press has become sort of the intermediary in America for controlling the narrative of what these people say. Yeah. Okay. What they both have, though, is a group of people called the whips. So they are simply what it says. They are responsible for whipping their party into shape. Democrats and Republicans, they both have them, the majority and minority whips, whichever they're residing at the time. But they're the ones who go around and say, how are you going to vote on this? Really? You don't know? Because I think you know. I think you know that I want to be doing this. You got it? You understand? You know, that's what the whip is doing. They're intense. They're in people's faces, and they get the message out about how they should vote as a voting bloc. What's our message going to be? What's our narrative? How are we going to spin this in the press? What are you going to say? How are you going to vote? Okay, you're not going to vote with us, so what do you want? And so they're the ones that come back to the leaders of the majority and minorities and say, hey, they'll vote with us, but only if they get this or this or that. And they're like, well, we can do a deal for this, but not for that. Go back and tell them. So the whips are the ones that run back and forth, you know, trying to broker deals. You know, what can we give? What can we get? To see how many things we can line up. All right? So the whips are pretty intense. You'll see them on the news from time to time, and they're usually the sort of attack dogs as each party. You know, they're the ones that are like, I don't like this, and they're the yellers and screamers. And that allows for the majority leader and minority leader to sort of stand back and be, well, now let's think about this calmly and rationally, and then they look like they're, you know, the thoughtful people in the room brokering a deal, whereas the whips are the crazy people on the side that are getting the message out there, but the majority and minority leaders don't have to take that heat, you know. So a lot of political games right there, okay? But those are the whips. If we go over to the Senate side, you're going to find that there's 100 senators there. And so if they were to have a tie vote, 50-50, the person who breaks the tie is the vice president. So the vice president has very few duties, except waiting around for the president to die. But one of their duties is to preside over the Senate. So in years past, you know, they would say, this Senate session is called to order, and they bang on the gavel. I recognize the senator from Connecticut. You have 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I will proceed. And they do their 5 minutes, and then they sit down, and he bangs the gavel and says, I recognize the senator from Washington. You have 5 minutes. This is intensely boring. And so what has happened is that the vice president, he just says, can I leave? And the senators are all like, yes, we can manage this without you just fine. And so he turns the gavel over to one of the senators, which is known as the president pro tempore. So basically, the person who presides, in this case, he's presiding over the Senate on a temporary fashion. That's the Latin going on here. So the vice president can show up any time and run the Senate, but they almost never do. So what happens is the senators just have a presiding person on a temporary basis run the Senate. And that's the senator, president pro tempore. Okay? They are, just like the Speaker of the House, incredibly powerful because they can decide for the Rules Committee in the Senate where bills go. They are always selected from the majority party, and so they are the majority leader of the Senate. And they are fourth in line to the presidency. So you got the president, the vice president, the speaker of the House, and then the president pro tempore in the Senate is fourth in line. Okay. So yeah, a lot of powers vested there. Currently, the Senate is run by Republicans. As of November 2nd here, we'll be having an election real quick. So we'll see if that changes. But currently, this person is Mitch McConnell from Kentucky. And so he is the one that's running the show there. He is Republican. So you've got Democrat over here as the majority leader. You've got a Republican over there as the majority leader. And these things can change with each election. So how do they select this person? Well, just like in the House, they go behind closed doors January 3rd. Once everyone's sworn in and they start arguing and fighting and making deals, and someone comes out to be the leader. All right? And then they still have minority leaders. And so you would look over here in the Senate. Chuck Schumer from New York has been particularly vocal against Mitch McConnell. So Mitch McConnell's a Republican. Chuck Schumer is a Democrat. And so he is, of course, constantly trying to take it to the other side. And helping him and the majority there is the whips. So just like in the House, they go around and they get the vote out there, make sure everyone's in line. Okay? So this is sort of the power structure of Congress and how it currently works. But as we learned, the committees are really where the action happens. And so how does that work? We got to look over here. Committees, you're usually given committees by seniority. Not always, but usually by seniority. So just as the Speaker of the House gets their position by brokering a lot of deals, strong-arming people, there's some bullying, cajoling, all kinds of things that go on. Also, people fight pretty hard for committee appointments. So if you're a new representative or senator, you're like, please, 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 can I be on? And then hopefully you can get some of the committees you're on, and then you can work your way up. So if you get reelected over and over, then if you've been on the finance committee for 15 or 20 years, then yeah, you're one of the top people on there. So it's based on seniority. So that's why those newcomers really like to get on there first, and then, over time maybe they can get some more seniority on that committee. And ultimately, if you want more power, you can work your position up to the chairperson of that committee. So the chairperson has a lot of power because they get to decide when they meet, how long they meet, who gets to speak. I mean, those are pretty powerful parts to it, all right? But usually committees are given by seniority, so the oldest members of Congress get to reside on the committees of their choice, and usually are chairpersons, and so you'll see their faces over and over and over. Whereas the new ones coming on, they like to get on there, make a splash, do the more outrageous things so they can get on the news and get their name known, get some more popularity and that kind of thing. But the leadership structure oftentimes looks at them as threats sometimes. So they'll give those junior senators and representatives, we'll give them a little thing and see what they do with it. And are you on board with us? And if you're not, we take it away, that kind of thing. So a lot of politics. How many people are on each committee is based on the percentage of each party. So if you have in, say, the House of Representatives, you have 60% of the total House of Representatives is Democrats and 40% of the House is Republicans, then what they do on every committee is that 60% of the people on the committee will be Democrat and 40% will be Republican. So whatever percentages they have in the actual total House, every committee will have those same percentages of members on the committee. All right? So it's reflective of the body as a whole, which is kind of interesting. So then, as an example, if you had 10 members on a committee and it was a 60-40 split in the main House, then 6 of the 10 would be Democrat and 4 of the 10 would be Republican. So it preserves the electoral body of the House or the Senate itself, and it's sort of like a micro Senate, micro House in the committees, and it's still reflective of the overall percentages. Okay. The committee then, all chairpersons are of the majority party. So in this example, if we just keep with it and there's a Democratic majority, then the chairperson would be one of these six right here. They would be a Democrat. Okay? And as I said, those chair people get to decide who speaks, when, what are the rules, when are we meeting, for how long, who are we bringing to investigate, who are we not looking at, That's a lot of power. Okay? So these are the leadership structure positions in the House and the Senate. The Speaker and the President pro tempore are very powerful, but also these chairpersons and in the committees wield a lot of power too. And whatever the country votes, 60-40, 70-30, 50-50, whatever it is, in the main body of the House or the Senate is reflected in the committees. All right? Thanks.